to the Weekly Bioanalysis, a KCAS podcast.
Hello and welcome to a very special edition of the Weekly Bioanalysis. We have made it to our 20th episode. My name is John Perkins and I'm the Senior Scientific Advisor for all things related to LC-MS technologies. I've been with KCS for 11 months, but I've been in Bioanalytical for over 25 years. I'm here with my co-host, Dominic Guarino.
Hello, my name is Dominic Guarino. I'm the Senior Scientific Advisor for all things related to ligand-binding assays, biomarkers, and flow cytometry. I've been with KCS for a little over 7.5 years now, and I've been in the bioanalytical space for close to 26 years.
To mark the milestone of the 20th episode of this podcast, we have a very special guest. I'd like to introduce you to John Bucksath, the CEO of KCAS.
Well, good morning, gentlemen. Thanks for inviting me to the show here. Appreciate it. How are you doing today?
Doing great. I think we're looking forward to a fun and entertaining podcast today, and very, very glad to have you here.
I appreciate the invite.
Today's podcast, as always, is brought to you by KCS Bioanalytical and Biomarker Services. KCS is a bioanalytical laboratory located in Kansas City, Kansas, serving the pharmaceutical and biotech industries for over 40 years now. Dom and I are senior scientific advisors at KCS, and either or both of us are available to answer any questions you may have regarding this podcast or any of KCS's services. We're thrilled to have you listening again. As mentioned, this will be our 20th week recording the podcast. So if you're interested, the other episodes can be found at kcsbio.com. As a reminder, you can follow us on Twitter at the Weekly Bio and at KCAS Bio. As we mentioned before, we started this whole thing because of social distancing getting in the way of normal communications. Even today, Dom and I are in completely different places. I'm in upstate New York, Dom and John are in Kansas City, and our producer is in Missouri. This weekly podcast gives the chance to connect with all of you, and we hope it's a chance for you to get to know us too. And even more, it's a chance for you to get to know KCS and the services we provide. As always, a review of latest news and resources, and then a focus on a topic of our choosing before discussing any feedback we've had from you. We're constantly looking for topics, and we'd be happy to discuss something that you want us to cover. Then we'll wrap up and give you a little teaser for next week, letting you know what is coming in the future. So again, we're thrilled to have you here, and we're looking forward to a fun episode today. To kick us off, Dom is going to go over today's agenda and podcast topic a bit before we jump into the news and resources section.
Yeah, what an exciting 20th podcast we have. We're very blessed to have our CEO John Bucksath with us. If you're not familiar with our podcast, the first topic we're going to talk about is our news and resources. Usually we touch on COVID and non-COVID related topics, and then we'll move along to our main portion. And today, again, as a special 20th episode, we'll have our CEO talking about the impact of COVID and what it's had on drug development industry. Some of the topics he'll touch on are the market trends, the year over year of IPOs, and the outlook for CROs. And then we'll take some feedback and questions from the audience, from all of you out there who hopefully are listening, and we do appreciate your feedback, so please keep giving that. And then we'll end with a little teaser towards next week's episode. So John, let's just jump right into the news and notes. So John, let's just jump right into the news and resources here. Got a lot of exciting items to go over today. And as usual, we'll start with the latest on COVID. John, as you know, there's been a massive outbreak in colleges across the country. I think Alabama is leading everybody, but at some major universities, there was a list of top 10 colleges. No big surprise there, but what was probably of note is 0 hospitalizations. But John, I think we saw this coming, and not a big shock to see outbreaks of COVID at universities, right?
Yeah, as I've said before, we so far seem to be relatively unaffected, though I know everyone in the town is concerned. But yeah, it is very interesting. You're talking thousands of positive cases, but so far 0 hospitalizations. But yeah, it's I don't know how you address this. I mean, it's such a weird balance in terms of people's lives. You want to progress. You know how key university is for your development, but how do you balance between in-life classes and online? And even if you're doing, you've got a course that's traditionally been in person, and now you're trying to convert it to online. It's a difficult thing to do. We were talking last night. My daughter's actually applying for a job at a culinary institute, and as a counsellor there, and we're just having a discussion. Then, is there any way that you could do that online? So probably not. So then everyone has to be in person. So you've then got this potential petri dish for infection. So yeah, it's a really tough challenge.
Yeah, well, any of those culinary, hairdressing, even like apprenticeships, you're going to have to be in the classroom. So, John, are you saying to date, like Cornell's back, Ithaca's back, and no real outbreaks? Is that what you're saying?
They're back. I haven't seen any news, but I will say I haven't been watching it. But my wife hasn't actually highlighted anything. She keeps far closer eye on the
Okay.
local news than I do because she works at Cornell. So
Yeah.
yes, I think it's. If I hear more, I'll mention it. But to date, I haven't really heard too much. Our bigger issue here seems to be the number of people who are being rescued from the gorges, compared to other years, because this is a glacial landscape, so there's deep gorges, and there's been, I think, over a dozen rescue cases in the various parks, and we were talking about this the other night and wondering if it's because people are trying to distance from other people in the parks because they're packed, that maybe they're going into parts that they shouldn't do, and then they're ending up in difficulty. So we have our own challenges.
Well, yeah. Well, it's better than some of the major cities where violence and gunshots are up. You're saying your gorge rescuing's up. That's hilarious, John. That's really kind of shows you how I think nice an area upstate New York is. But let me share a little bit. Last night I was able to do some social distancing with some friends. Somebody celebrated a 4th birthday, and there were a couple other couples there, but I got a lot of download on a lot of freshmen in college here at K-State and KU, and they're one of the fraternities had one outbreak, and what they did was you had the option of going home for 14 days or having to be stuck in your fraternity for 14 days. So there is some little pockets they're trying to mitigate it. The classes are still kind of hybrids, which was interesting, but I think that's something to kind of monitor and look at. So, but John, let's move on to our next topic here. I think the biggest one of the week is the temporary halt on the AstraZeneca Oxford trial. This was a front runner, as we know, for the COVID vaccine in the UK, your kind of hometown. We saw that there was a serious adverse event. This isn't all that uncommon I think in AAV or adenovirus vaccines. It's not uncommon to have these sort of adverse events that cause a temporary hold. But with all the limelight on it for COVID, this became national news, right? This is really a big event, and everybody, I think, is kind of getting a little worried and all that sort of stuff, right?
Exactly. I think it illustrates why this is a process that can't be rushed. Like you say, it's not uncommon to have serious adverse events in a trial. The hold was voluntary, so AstraZeneca, to their credit, are not pushing forward. They're taking the time to investigate this. But I think, like I say, the take-home message for me is this happens, but it's a strong reason as to why we can't rush these trials too much. They have to be given the time to really dig into whether there are the possibilities of adverse events, or if those adverse events are even vaccine related. They may not be. In this case, it might just be with this person had an adverse event, and we now have to figure out the source of it.
Yeah, it's amazing how something that like this would have normally never made some of the outlets we look at, but this certainly became, it was on CNN and Fox News and everything like that. So, but it's to be determined. I still think that vaccine is very promising, but it certainly gave the Moderna and the Pfizer BioNTech a big boost to stocks, as well as they probably are. I do know I read they're reshuffling the vaccine. I remember we had a ranking of the vaccines that should be coming out next week. So we'll definitely keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how long this delays AstraZeneca. I saw one report saying they could maybe pick up next week. I saw other places saying it could be a couple of months. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch the progress here.
Yeah, and I like the idea of I really think I like keeping up to date on who's the forerunner and all that, because I do think sometime here soon all of us are going to have some decisions about not just do we want to get vaccinated for COVID, maybe which vaccine you want to take, and that's
Sure.
I think there were at one point there used to be I think the flu vaccine, as well as like the pneumococcal vaccine, you had some choices. Now I think each has emerged. When you go to the doctor, they now kind of push you in one direction. So
Although the pneumococcal vaccine was back in the news, because although the one that is the big seller is it Prevnar, is the
yep.
Pfizer vaccine. Actually, Merck may have a vaccine that did well or they do have a vaccine that did well in phase 3, and so it may actually be a serious competitor to Prevnar if it completes.
Yeah, and then of course Prevnar is a
Development.
13, and Pfizer's already got one lined up for like 18, so they're going to
Sure.
combat that.
Yeah,
That's a tennis match right there with that one. So
so we read the same article, is what you're saying.
yeah, oh yeah, John. This next one I think is one of the most fascinating ones. We have talked about remdesivir for weeks now, and now there's a company, Star Pharma, who's looking to make it a subcutaneous injection rather than an infusion. And so, without maybe nerding out too much on that, that means they found a way to give it dermal instead of an IV. And I didn't know you had to go in for 5 days in a row for treatment with remdesivir and everything. This can be done potentially from home. So, really cool science and moving at an unprecedented rate. I think that type of leap from one sort of approval of the drug given a certain way into a second one or an alternative dosage usually takes a couple years. So this was quite promising. I think remdesivir is our friend, and I think it's great that this company, Star Pharma, is on it like this. And they're an antibody drug conjugate company that's kind of made this leap into giving the remdesivir subcutaneous. Real cool.
I think the the more we read about drug delivery, the more interesting it is, because of the challenges of these drugs that are difficult to administer. I mean, we typically think of remdesivir as a small molecule, so think, well, that's going to be taken orally, until you read about it. And yes, like you say, it's an infusion, but it's obvious it must be down to solubility issues, etc. But they're talking about they include it in a nanoparticle to then increase its solubility to then enable this subdermal uh, administration. But I also look in the article, it's saying Gilead are also looking at ways of administering remdesivir via an inhalant approach. So it's going to be interesting to see these different delivery approaches and how they impact the further implementation of remdesivir.
Yeah, that's a great point on that Gilead's actually looking at nebulizing it, and they say that it's supposed to abate some of the anemia, acute kidney injury, as well as some liver enzyme elevations. But you made a really good point there. I think most people think small molecules are oral, and this one is indeed an injection, which, as you said, is probably a solubility issue. But really, that was an important part, and that's why it's such a big breakthrough to see it being dosed in other fashions, because you can avoid hospitalization and everything like that. So really, really interesting stuff. And as we do dig in, it is a fascinating field. How drug delivery is really a cool thing, but and maybe a topic, John, right? Maybe that's something we
Yeah, maybe that's a good thing to do, actually, because there is one that we, at the same time, I founded another drug delivery one that seems to have disappeared off the agenda. So maybe we just look at some of these different approaches, because I know we've touched on it in the past, and it might be nice to have a more concerted discussion of some of these what people are doing to enhance drug delivery of these large molecules, etc.
Yeah, and even small, and that's a whole main topic. There are a lot of things that not only are people doing it to combat adverse events and making it easier to take, it's also a business, and some are doing it to avoid patent. A lot of biologics coming off patent, so they just simply, instead of making it injectable, they try to do it orally or maybe even sub-Q. So, John, we got a couple more items here that I think are important to touch on related to COVID. That's the big pledge from Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Moderna, and others to not rush the COVID-19 vaccine. I mean, that's been a political hot topic. Me
Yep.
personally, I feel like the FDA and all these companies, they're gonna just silence all that and do the right thing, as AstraZeneca did this week. I'm not overly worried about this. I think that good scientists could do good work, ethical work, independent of any political influence. So, but it's made real big news, and certainly something that we'll continue to keep an eye on as we move towards
I,
our
I I think I agree with you. I think AstraZeneca's actions basically back up their signature on this letter. They've definitely done the right thing in the case of this adverse event, and if they'll do it, I'm sure the other companies will take the same approach, because that's really the way we're conditioned to operate in this sphere. I mean, for them, it's key that what they produce is safe and effective, because the long term they want to be helping patients, and they don't want to be opening themselves up to lawsuits. So yeah, I agree with you on that.
Yeah, and we'll continue to monitor that one, but I think it was important to highlight it, and again, certainly something that is making news across the country. But for all of us here on this podcast, we have faith, and we believe that these companies will do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, John, this next item was I think again more. Seem to be on a fascinating, super cool stuff going on, but this one is great, right? So they're finding ways. LabCorp is launching a COVID-19 diagnostic that allows people to get tested for flu and respiratory syncytial virus from a single sample. Really good stuff. As we enter into flu season, this can be something that could really help out. Not just obviously the patient understanding of what they may or may not have, but certainly going to help doctors. And it's all about movement and speed and nimbleness, and having a test that can answer 3 questions in one is great. And I think it's something that certainly, should I not be feeling well, I'm going to be looking to get this LabCorp test, right?
Yeah, not only can you get tested for the flu, but you can do it at home. So then that's that taking the burden off the doctor's office, etc. It would be interesting to know what their positive, if they've any, how they, in terms of false positives, false negatives, things like that, what the rate is for this kit. But is definitely a fascinating step forward. I mean, I think you're starting to see articles in the media about potential concern about the upcoming flu season, how it will intersect with our current COVID pandemic, and just what the effect is going to be on the on the medical, sphere. So obviously anything like this that can help diagnose quicker, take the burden off doctors, etc., is got to be a helpful step forward.
Yeah, and that's a key point you made around it's a home test. So now you don't have to go to a hospital. That can avoid even hospitals are a place where you got to be careful going into them, and this really does help mitigate that being an issue by being able to take it from home. So really something. And I like what you said. I wonder if I could find some time to kind of look around to see if you can get what their false positive, false negative rate is.
And one other key is it's a short nasal swab rather than the right all the way up the nose swab, so should be relatively easy to do as well, and not unpleasant. Like I mentioned last week, my son went for the COVID test, and went for the full all the way up the nose thing. So yeah, he was a little bit shocked by that. So
Yeah,
I
it
think
feels like
it'd be
they're
good.
taking a piece of your brain, right? That's what I haven't had it done, but people describe it as like, oh my goodness, they're John. This next story, you found this one around Bergamo, Italy. This is really something that I don't know if concerning is the right word, but not what don't go have no COVID COVID parties so that you get infected, right? We talked about that. That is not a good idea. You do not want to get infected with COVID. It's not a measles party or any of that stuff. So, John, tell us a little bit more about this article you unearthed around what's happening in Italy.
So well, Italy basically was one of the hotspots early on in this pandemic, and centered around the Bergamo region. Is it our town? So it must be anyway. Centered around Bergamo, and the good thing that the medics there have done, actually, a lot of the hospitals who were dealing with patients when they were hospitalised have now transitioned to doing long term monitoring of that population. And really, the article's saying that although they were released from hospital, they're described as recovered. About 50% of those patients still say they're really struggling with the effects of COVID. So, although to all intents and purposes they're off ventilators, they're still dealing with this condition. So, it really illustrates, and I'm starting to read again more articles about people who haven't been hospitalized but have this sort of long-term COVID syndrome where they're just debilitated and at home, and they've been dealing with it for weeks and months. And it really illustrates how this is not something you want to catch. You really do want to avoid it. So if you've got the measures of mitigating and minimizing your chance of catching COVID, you really should do it. So we get back on the hygiene, masks, etc.
Yeah.
But I think that really is the although the article says one thing, the key take home from this is listen to what the medical practitioners are saying and do what you can to avoid catching this.
Yeah, don't let your guard down, right? I mean, I feel like here in Kansas City, that's definitely happening. Where even last night there was almost, I mean, I had a mask on, but there were a limited number of individuals that had it on, and that worried me. And I'm going to avoid that again in the future. But some quick stats, right? So 750 patients that were screened, about 30% have lung scarring and breathing trouble, and another 30% have inflammation and clotting, right? And some heart abnormalities and artery blockage. So, John, that was something that weeks ago we had on one of the podcasts. We talked about how people were seeing, clotting became a major, and by the way, doctors now treat that, right? So that was a great thing for them to unearth. But now we're seeing these long-term effects, and it's just something where don't just when I had heard people say things like, well, I'm not worried about it, I'll just get it and it won't be a big no, I mean, no, that's not an approach. We really got to figure out a way to avoid getting it altogether. And it's
Yeah,
wash your hands, wear a mask, social distance. These aren't hard things to do. It might be the new norm, but I mean, like even tonight we got a football game going on. There's 20,000 people or 18,000 people going to be in the stadium. It's 20%. I hope they social distance, because it would be a shame to see an outbreak, because then that's sort of opening things up. And I know I jumped around on you, but that's here in Kansas City is opening night in the NFL, and there's going to be 18,000 people in a stadium that holds 80. So let's hope they are social distancing and we don't see some, outbreak because of it. But this is something to be followed more, John, and I'm certainly going to keep my eye out for long-term health issues related to COVID
sure.
infection.
Yeah, again, I think it's something we'll no doubt revisit in the future, because it is fascinating again, because we always in the early days we thought it's just the lungs, but we know it now it does so much more, and we're going to continue to learn about this.
Yes, so John, we're going to jump away from COVID for a minute here and continue with our news and notes. And one really interesting article from it's a Boston-based biotech. I'm going to hack the name of this. It's Electrophy, I think is how you say that. It's out of MIT, and they're this is another delivery of drugs. They're taking biologics because that's on the rise, and they're partnering with a Danish company, a dermatology Danish company called Leo, and they're finding ways to do microparticles and other ways of delivering biologics, which again is great science, because biologics typically take a hospital visit or some sort of IV. So if you could take home a needle or do a simple sub-Q, that's a major. Not only is it easier on the system itself, it also allows for more adherence to taking the drug. I think that's a big part of the problem with biologics. People will skip treatments, or they just simply won't want to go. But if it's there, I think it's easier if you're in a nursing home or wherever. If it avoids an IV, taking something sub-Q is always a much better route of administration. So pretty cool stuff, this advancement for making biologics in a non-injectable or non-IV format.
Yes, yeah. So this one it's a microparticle technology that it delivers ultra high concentration, low viscosity protein formulations. So it's quick, and like we've said before, when you're talking an IV administration, it can take hours. Any step forward like this, where you can have it administered quickly, could be a real boon to patients.
Well, that's a good point. It makes it more potent too. I kind of missed that in the article. That's a really, that's another somewhat, challenge that we've overcome with biologics, is getting it systemic, getting it so that it's not too potent, right? That can be bad, but there's a right mix there between not having enough and lacking efficacy, and having too much and causing some sort of immune response, right? Complexing. The biggest problem with biologics is they can cause a complex, and your immune system is not like. I mean, you get a complex, that's a real problem. Without getting too much into immunology, but that's like that triggers all sorts of innate immune responses, and that's when you get into trouble when a biologic starts to complex. So, really cool stuff there. So, John, why don't we jump right into our drug approvals for August? We've been kind of pushing that one off. Why don't you
Sure.
take down a
Well,
quick
we
rundown?
only pushed it off 1 week, but August was a big month for drug approvals. There was a total of 8, and actually I didn't check out the total for the year, but we must be around close to 40.
I think so.
Even split between small and large molecule. The large molecule are like an interesting mix where it's 2 antibodies, one oligonucleotide, and then 1 growth hormone. So lots of different approaches there. And then actually the approvals were over a wide range as well. Usually expect a number of oncology is actually just the one oncology approval, 1 CNS, 1 infection for parasitic disease, a couple of rare disease, 1 inflammation, and 2 for genetic disorders. So it was, it's always interesting. Mixes, usual GSK, Bayer, Genentech. Couple of Genentech approvals, Novo Nordisk, and then smaller companies like Trevena, NS Pharma, and Cassiopeia SPA. So it's an interesting mix of things out there, and good to see how much is still being approved in a time when we were looking at a relative slowdown.
Yeah, that it's the we continue to see a 50-50 split. Again, big number. 8 is a nice number. I think we're probably on pace to top 5 all-time approvals. I'm sure it's close to that. Again, small molecules are not dead. That's just a misnomer. And then it was a real good mix of disease types. So we want to give our guest an opportunity here. John Bucksath, any thoughts on drug approvals in August?
Yeah, just the reaction to that. I echo the same comments there that, very successful month for the industry. I think what jumps out to me really is how over the years, when I was thinking back in my 30 years, when we think about the drug development, um, really in my day when I was in the lab and we were working with clients in the late 90s and mid 90s and that point in time, the whole paradigm is really shifted, right? I mean, today we think about oncology being the largest subset of opportunities coming down the pipeline. But in the 90s, everything was really kind of focused on this blockbuster mentality. And quite frankly, we've learned so much since then that back then oncology was very complex. We really didn't understand it as well, or the complexity of developing that. Those products really were, quite a challenge relative to the other opportunities. So back in quote unquote my day, there was a lot of things maybe more focused in maybe the pain category or COPD, cardiology, those type of areas was probably more of a focus than today, like in oncology, rare disease, Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's wasn't even really what he talked about back then. So for me, probably the biggest reaction, just looking back through with that type of lens on the development over time, is just the specificity that drugs have now. Rare disease back then wasn't on industry's radar, again, because everybody was looking for these like blockbuster type drugs. Back then, too, biologics were just a rare concept. They really didn't get any attention. Too complex. Why we go that path? So everything was basically in the pipeline was basically small molecules for the most part. So it's been very interesting to watch the evolution of drug development. Obviously, nobody can deny that the biologics have really brought in some additional tools in some incredible drugs, some incredible quality of life type improvement drugs, life saving drugs that maybe, quite frankly, the small molecules were, kind of getting at their end of it was great to add them to the team. We'll put it that way. So for me, it's been absolutely fascinating to watch over the years. Now, relative to August, as mentioned, 8 approvals is fantastic. It's great to see that trend improving. I remember speaking with our clients, the industry, over several years, and the thought being, just as relative as many as 10 or 15 years ago, is that drug approvals were actually going to slow down because all of the easy stuff was done, as they would put it. And what we're seeing actually just the opposite. So it just goes to show that the industry continues to focus, enjoys learning how to really identify disease, get the specificity going in such a way that we can target. And again, with the biologics now, we brought in a whole new tool set. So, I'm very excited about where the drug development industry is headed and, what it does for our quality of life. I think we take that for granted. We have an incredible example here with COVID-19. In some respects, talking with my children, they're like, wow, Dad, this is a really interesting thing. It's scary. Is this like the worst thing that's ever happened? And I'm like, oh,
No.
definitely not. If you do history and just a real enjoyable time going back and talking things like polio and the Spanish flu, and saying that part of the industry that we're in was really helped put those things behind us to the point that when something like COVID-19 comes along, we're it kind of reminds us. Unfortunately, it's a challenging situation, but it does remind us of the contributions that the industry has made to the quality of life and longevity of life, for that matter.
Yeah,
Um,
John. Yeah, John. Thanks. And that's I think one of the things I really want to highlight is back in, as you said, it was the focus was on like cardiac and pain drugs and all those blockbusters. So it is really an altruistic spirit to go ahead and start treating, maybe a genetic disorder that only, a couple thousand people have. So the field has really blossomed in that respect. So, John, I think we can move on to our main portion, and we're going to give you a chance to shine here.
Can I
So-
can I
Go ahead,
just say,
go ahead, John. Sure, please.
sorry, Dominic, can I just say a couple of things? Yeah, I always remember the term low-hanging fruit being used for drugs in like the 90s, and we'd certainly have customers come in and talk and say, well, we've obviously got anti-cholesterol drugs that have got this huge market. We're not quite sure where we're going to go next. But I thought it was really interesting you touched on polio there, John, because it was an article that I think I forwarded earlier in the week. It was a doctor in New York wrote, and it really talked about the perspective of polio. And I encourage anyone to go and read back about polio and what it meant in terms of number of cases per year. And this article also touched on tuberculosis the same way, number of cases and number of deaths. I mean, I remember when I was at high school in Glasgow, there was actually someone there caught polio, and the entire school immediately that next day, we all had the sugar cube with the polio vaccine in it to ensure that it was kept under control. So it's really commendable how far we've come in terms of dealing with things like that, but also it's really fascinating where the drug industry is going and the conditions that it's turning to treat. The rare disease area is absolutely enthralling. If you talk to anyone who's working against rare diseases and you start looking at some of the really unfortunate conditions that people are dealing with, but that now we have companies who are focusing on that. Drug development is going in a very, very, very interesting direction, and it's really, really rewarding to be part of it.
Absolutely, John. And I think the other is the neurodegenerative space. That's although there's been some setbacks, I still think that's an area that you're going to see massive growth in over time. So it's a nice segue into today's main topic. We're just thrilled to have the CEO of KCS with us, John Bucksath. He's going to talk to us about the impact COVID has had on drug development industry. The topics he's going to touch on are the market trends, the year-over-year IPOs, and an outlook for CROs. So we're going to throw it over to you, John. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what the market's looking like, We're thrilled to have you. Thanks for joining us. And we're going to sit back and let you drive a little bit while John Perkins and I, take a little back seat and keep our feet up this week and relax a little.
Okay, gentlemen. Well, thanks for having me to your show, and congratulations on all the success you've had in your podcast here. I'm very happy to be included moving forward on one of your podcasts. So, yeah, for the topics, obviously, COVID-19 has had incredible impacts to just about every industry. Ours, what we refer to as our industry included, whether it's the drug industry or the CRO industry. I think we roll the clock back to March of 2020. There was a lot of confusion, there was a lot of concern, and quite frankly, just the unknown was probably the biggest impact. And everybody was kind of bracing and quite frankly, turned more to a personal reaction to dealing with, um, the situation at hand. So with all the measures and unknowns that were coming in from the economic impacts, as well as how would it possibly impact operational aspects of drug development. It's been a pretty amazing story, quite frankly. So from the CRO seat, right? Sometimes um, we're looking at obviously if the industry is continuing to develop and outsource in their normal pattern, it kind of has a rhythm to it, and as drugs continue, the R&D expenditures continue to go up. Nominally, we would expect that outsourcing as the same percentage would kind of stay, that it would kind of be a linear relationship there. But when you have such disruption like a virus like COVID-19, or relate that back to the recession in 2008, it can have a major impact. Obviously, everybody's very aware that COVID-19 had major impacts on the clinical aspects of what many CROs were doing, and many clinical programs had to be halted or stopped, and in some cases, some are even been taken off the books, so to speak. But it kind of showed the resiliency of the industry as much of that is coming back online. So just, in general, what we're hearing is that by Q4, most operations are really kind of back online, including the clinical programs. And so really looking at that, one of the things that, I always ask myself at the end of the day, we are running businesses, and where's the investment community on this? What kind of impact has it had with the venture capital market or the IPO market? And so, taking a look at that, those are things that I'm constantly looking at and actually interacting with the folks that play in these spaces, and it's actually been quite amazing. I think there are some underlying reasons why, the information I'm going to share why it's happening, but quite frankly, the resiliency of the industry we're in really kind of just strutted its stuff, so to speak. So just to kind of put some numbers out there for you, I was looking at the VCs and their interest in this, and now I only have information probably up through the first half of the year. There obviously could be some trailing effects, but as of now, so for example, I went and looked at the VC deal activity in the biotech and pharma space, and just to compare it to 2019, which was a fantastic year. I think 2018 was even better, but there was 17 billion dollars, really in that space that was just in that VC. So I mean, we're talking early development, because as we all know, many of these eventually either come IPO or they're acquired. But in the space, there was 17 billion in that VC area. Okay, and so as of just halfway through the year, and by the way, there was 957 deals that made up that 17 billion. So one would probably naturally assume that because of COVID-19 and just the disruption, let alone the evaluation of the market or concerns about the market going forward, in 2020, at the end of June, there was roughly half, 435 deals, and that totaled $11.2 billion. So even at halfway through the year, we were well more than halfway of what has happened in the VC market in 2020. And I think I think the second half of the year won't be quite as robust, but the point being that there's still a tremendous amount of investment. And as we know, there's been incredible success in the marketplace. And so there's been a lot of cash on the sidelines, so to speak, that's still looking for a place to invest. And when you think back about it, quite frankly, with all the disruption to the markets out there, and where would be a good place to invest money during this COVID-19, well, I think it does turn to a more of a I hate the term, but I'll say it. A lot of people refer to it as recession-proof type opportunities in the pharma market or biotech markets when it comes to producing products for life-saving cures or quality of life. People, that is a staple. So I think a lot of the investments turned his attention to that, and I think, quite frankly, the industry is kind of a benefactor of that. So I also wanted to look, moving over and kind of just looking at the IPOs because that has become more in favor again, and wondered if maybe that in this situation had a big impact, especially when you look back at when the market seemed like it was bottoming out. I think it was March 23rd, 2020, when the market had dropped more than 30% at that point in time, and at that point in time, we weren't sure where it was going to stop, but we all know kind of where we're at now. But what are the mechanics of that and what kind of impact has it had. So kind of looking through that from the IPOs, again, 2020 year to date, again, we're in the marketplace from the information I have, which I'll go ahead and share is from Crunchbase News. Just sitting here looking at the information, and this was as of August 15th, 2020. Again, 37 IPOs in the biotech industry. Last year, there were 51. Again, the interesting aspect of this is that in 2019, the total IPO market was capped at around $5 billion. Here we are in September. And again, remember, this date is as August 15th, 2020. That number is 6.7 billion. So there's already been more IPOs come out at an evaluation in this market under these COVID-19 conditions. That's $1.7 billion higher than it was last year at this time. So, crunching all this down, what does it mean? It really boils down to there's significant investment and still a lot of interest in drug development.
John,
And
I want to jump in. That is I want to reemphasize what you just said there. So the market to date is already exceeded 2019 in terms of its investments related to IPOs. Is that accurate? So 6.7 billion to
it,
date
it
versus
has
5 billion last year, right? So
for IPOs, and to really kind of put that in perspective, looking back from 2015 to 2019. Um, the next highest year was 2018 at 5.2 billion. Now, again, an IPO is a mechanism for companies to raise capital, but in the marketplace, it had kind of fallen out of favor. But in this regard, is what it's signaling is that the industries are doing well, and that the investors are finding this, whether it be a safe place or a desirable place to be. Again, it bodes very, very well for the industry to have the capital it needs to continue to develop its products in spite of this COVID-19 impact. And arguably, some of this might be relative that COVID-19 created a positive effect on this as well.
yeah, and I think you touched on the 2008 recession, and in discussions offline that we've had, you mentioned how, look, there's still money out there. It's not a recession. People are having the money. It seems like there was a pause in spending some of that, and I'm using it sort of loosely. But now it seems like there's vamped up. There's been quite a few IPOs recently, and do you feel like, the recession led to lack of funding that caused a dip. When COVID came out, there was a slight dip, but it's rebounded. Do you think like the spending towards the second half of the year and going forward, I feel like it's going to open up, but do you feel like it's maybe even going to be a historic year around and continue to trend upward? Or do you think as I feel like the venture capitalists are thirsty is the word that comes to mind to invest in biotech and pharma. And I just think it's going to continue to blossom, not just this year, but in subsequent years.
Great point, great question. I think there's two ways to look at it from where I sit, and you have to put these in perspective. So, do I think this year could, relative to IPOs in the venture capital markets, that play in this space, have a year higher than last year? Absolutely. But then you turn the coin and say, okay, what impact did COVID-19 have? Could it have been even better? And I think relative to where the industry was headed, um, the numbers probably could have been even better and could have been just a banner year for the industry relative to raising capital and investment. So, in that regard, relative to the market where it could have been, I think it might come in, surprisingly very close to, where it could, where maybe it was hoped to have been before, COVID-19 was on everybody's mind. But reality suggests to me, and based on the trends and some of the information I read, that we're probably going to come in a little less than that. But again, roll the clock back to March 23rd, all bets were off. All speculation was, wow, this is, we got to look through a different lens at this point in time. So,
Yeah.
the robustness of the industry is really demonstrated its wherewithal at this point.
Yeah, I think March 23rd, I know that was when we were looking at our list of customers and we were starting to hear whispers about trials being delayed and possibly not happening. There was a real concern about what would this mean? Would it reflect 2008 or what would happen? But it's been great to see that there was a blip, but really we've picked up from it, and the whole market's moving forward really nicely.
Yeah, absolutely. Relative to the information I shared, relative to where the market was projected to be before COVID-19 was really on anybody's radar, I read some information. I apologize, I can't recall the article, but as you can imagine, there's a lot of articles being written about the impact and speculation and so on and so forth. One article suggested that for the clinical market, the CRO market, that it will take till 2023, arguably out into 2024, to completely recover and be back on track with what had been 5-year projections, which makes sense, right? Clinical trials take a long time. Um, the industry has to get these things back on track. Obviously, I know, one of the discussions, one of the things that, some of the silver lining coming out of this is, for lack of a better word, forced a lot of companies to kind of move into more of that virtual aspect, which I think in the long term will help the clinical programs excel and exceed, and maybe arguably help us, get through clinical programs faster and bring more drugs to market faster. So maybe if there's anything, that'd be some silver lining that I believe might come out of this.
Great stuff, John. Thanks. John, before we before we finish up, there's probably one more thing. I don't know if we touched on it exactly. You sort of mentioned the outlook for CROs. Why don't you share with us your thoughts specifically? You mentioned the clinic a little bit, but how about specifically, the bioanalytical, the GLP space, and maybe even the GMP space? That'll be our
And,
last topic here. And what do you see there? Oh, go ahead, John.
and more about your vision for KCS as we move forward too.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, I'm taking 3 major things here. I'll start with probably the easier one there, just from a market perspective. The GMP aspects. That's an interesting space right now. It's been interesting, as we all know, the CDMOs, if you will, if I can just kind of lump everything into that when we talk about the GMP space. They were on a tear, right, with gene therapy and the complexity of making these type of products. There was obviously a lot of demand as that pipeline had swelled, and quite frankly, outsourcing is now becoming a strategy and not just a tactical measure for many of these companies, particularly for biotech companies. Now compound that with the executive order that Trump signed, suggesting that there's certain specific products that we want to bring back here, so our supply chains are not in the precarious position they were in case that COVID-19 really opened eyes, and everything being sourced out of India or China in many of these cases. I think that too has created some opportunities, particularly here in the U.S., for a lot of GMP providers that are already set up and ready to go to do quite well. So I see that. I see that particular segment in the outsourcing realm doing quite well. I think that will continue to go. The bioanalytical space, as a whole, I think there will definitely be some slowdown impact. Right, it's going to correlate directly to some of the slowdown in the clinical areas. That said, it could create a little bit of pent-up demand going into maybe, say, mid next year, as a lot of things try to get back on track, and we get moving, we get going. And quite frankly, who knows what COVID-19, a lot of the work that some of the CROs and service providers have employed, what kind of impact it may have on their capacity and what they're able to do as they've kind of turned some of their focus to that versus maybe more of the traditional R&D work. For KCS, we've made a conscientious decision to stay very focused, on the drug development aspect, serving our clients in that R&D space. Obviously, we're providing some aspects to the COVID-19, everything from specific, very directed development of antibody assays to clinical kitting to doing some of those things, but we haven't ventured off into, for example, creating a new service line. And the reason was, one, we want to stay focused, and two, we know that our customers are out there still counting on us to help them get back on track. And I think we've done an excellent job at that moving forward. So KCS will continue to invest in its talent first, its capabilities and capacity to continue to move forward. As just recently described in the investment still seems to be strong. So as long as we do our job, we still see the opportunity to grow the organization and continue to round out our services to help our clients develop their drugs faster.
Hey, John, thank you very much for all that. I think it was a wonderful discussion and really informative. John Perkins, any last thoughts on the impact of COVID and what John went over?
No, I thought it was excellent. Thanks, John. It's always nice to have another set of eyes other than the two of us who are getting very used to our own different perspectives. So to have another voice and talk about how it's affected the business and what the likely effect is very, very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and one thing as I look at something here, back in 2015, there were actually 49 IPOs that only netted like a little over 3 billion. The amount of the IPOs this year is only 37 and it's 6.7 billion. So the dollars in 5 years have really, really increased, which again, I think is a really good trend. But, thanks. Go ahead.
Just one more thing. Sorry, Dominic. I actually was reading something in passing before the podcast that I think there's at least 5 more companies are lining up to go for IPOs as well. So it's not stopping.
Yeah, I saw that, John. I likewise, that came across my radar. I think it felt like there was maybe not a lull, but just like they were trickling. And now I think, like you said, there really are quite a few. And even in the last month, there's been a real uptick with, even in this article that John provided around, there's 3 major companies that hit their IPO in the last month. Or in the last like 6 weeks. And I think you're going to see more and more of it. And without a doubt, so we're so lucky to be in this industry. And, as John said, it's not necessarily bulletproof, or recession proof, but certainly looks ripe in the future. So with that, we're going to close out our main portion. We're going to go to some feedback and questions. Looks like we got a couple this week. John, you want to kick us off?
Sure. First of all, Rhonda says, just listen to episode 15, the one about the importance of validation. Great podcast. Thank you for the information. Thank you very much, Rhonda. I mean, we are great believers in quality science, and validation is a huge part of that.
Yeah, that was a fun one. I feel like that we got to revisit that one in a couple of weeks, John, because I feel like there's more to dig into around validation, but that was a lot of fun. So the next feedback we got was from Antonio. He says, wow, over 3,000 hours of video watched. How did you and your team go about gaining such a wide audience after just a few podcasts? So I think that's a testament to our marketing team. I don't know. I don't know about you, John. You and I just kind of show up and we do our thing. I'm going to give Jeremy and Aaron, and I even think our BD team has really done a great job of they enjoy it. We get a lot of feedback from them. They're learning from it. They use it as a tool, but I think they're getting out there and posting it as well. So it's been wonderful. And I don't know, John, any thoughts on why you think we're having some success?
I think overall it's been a great team effort. Absolutely, total kudos to Jeremy and Aaron for what they've done and setting this up in terms of getting the word out there, etc. I mean, I just turn up and babble, and hopefully we make some sense over the course of it, and people enjoy it. So I think it seems to be a winning recipe so far.
Yeah, and maybe we should even give some credit to John, who's here, and our executive team for even, giving the green light to allow us to do a podcast. So kudos to them as well.
I agree with that, and it actually thanks John for giving us the freedom to actually not just do this, but to steer it. It goes where we pretty much want it to go, and it's been. I think that's why it's been a lot of fun to do. Is we set the agenda, we talk about what we want to talk about, and hopefully make these informative podcasts for people to listen to. So yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, that's a great point. Go ahead and close us out. The last feedback here, John.
Sure. Last one. Rouse says, after listening to your episode on the importance of multiple trials and good laboratory practices, I listened to news about fast tracking the COVID vaccine in a different light, and not necessarily in a good one. Thanks, Rouse. I like we can tell we've we trust the science and the companies to do the right thing, so we're not too panicked about it. But we obviously we're great believers that there's a process to be followed, and we want that to be adhered to, so we know we end up with safe products for the patient population.
Yeah, I think if AstraZeneca hadn't come out and halted the trial, we might be responding a little bit different here. But clearly, this should instill some confidence in the public that companies are going to do the right thing. I think ethical people, good people, do the right thing, and I'm 99.9% of the people out there are in that category. And so I wouldn't, if there is any vaccine that's approved, I wouldn't listen to any of the rhetoric around, it's being influenced by this political party or that political party. You got to trust things, and these companies, and even our FDA is really very good about before they're going to mass distribute it, making sure it's safe and effective. So great question there. And that'll do it for the feedback from fans this week. John Bucksath, you're back in the hot seat. We got a couple questions for you, as we do for all guests. How about we start with, why don't you tell us what your favorite podcast episode was?
Oh, that's a tough one. But I think the one that really, probably the one I really focused on, and just for the first time, as you guys mentioned, that, this was something new. I was really focused on just, where are you guys going with this? How does this work? But I think it was really the one, I think it was episode 9, Unsung Heroes of Bioanalysis, Support and Services. I would just, for the first time, really just sitting back and enjoying and listening to that without, walking along with you, so to speak, after you've already had the podcast. So I think it was at that point, for that particular one, where I found myself saying, wow, this has really turned out well. The guys are doing a great job, and it's turned into something more than I thought it would. I had high expectations for it, but I was just really, really impressed with what you gentlemen have put together.
Well, that segues it nicely into the next question. What was the reaction you had when, Jeremy came to you and said, hey, we're thinking about a podcast?
My first question is, okay, I understand what a podcast, but what are we going to say? What are we going to do? And, the team's very convincing if you've ever talked to Jeremy. And quite frankly, one of the things that I feel is that, KCS, we wanted to get our brand out there. And, I just kind of, from that perspective, just decided, hey, we've got, two incredibly gifted scientists, experts, as long as they stay within the curbs of, keeping it focused and really creating some value for the industry and having some fun with it as well. Fine. And then the last question I asked Jeremy is, we can edit anything that if they get off on the tangent, right? And he said yes. And I'm like, oh, then we're great. So
that's because you know me all too well, John, right?
I say all that, knowing that having a chance to get to know both you gentlemen, that it was going to do well, but quite frankly, it surpassed what I anticipated it being. So congratulations, and again, thank you for having me on the show.
Thanks, John. We're going to take you out of the hot seat. Unless you want to share, John, do you have any? What are your plans this weekend?
Well, I think based on the conversation my wife was having with my oldest daughter, I'm pretty sure that there's at least going to be a part of my weekend that involves moving my daughter's furniture up a couple flight of stairs. So I'm trying to get my mind in the right place to uh, be prepared for that. So I'm pretty sure that's what's going to be happening this weekend. Of course, after that, I'll be recouping in some form or fashion.
John, you got
Tom,
to outsource that, man. You got to get someone to do that. Doesn't she have some young friends or something?
yeah, I was going to say I'm heartbroken. I'm in upstate New York, so I really can't help you with that one.
She's my first baby, so when she asks, she pretty much gets what she wants. But I have pointed out to her that at your age you should have ample friends, and she says, "Well, Dad, I still appreciate it." I think it's really not so much the brawn part as the ability to put parts and pieces together
Oh,
rather effectively is probably really the driving force for having me there.
I see. I hope it's not any IKEA stuff because that can be a lot of fun, if you know what I mean.
Oh yeah, I do. I had that experience with my youngest daughter moving in last week into her start of her freshman career at college.
Nice. Excellent. Well, maybe one last question for you, John. What's your favorite dish?
My favorite dish, I'm getting older, 54 years old. My palate's changing, but quite frankly, anything my wife makes that I get to put on the grill. So probably if I had to pick one thing that most recently she's been really coming up with some incredible recipes for like shish kebabs, particularly around the vegetables and chicken and beef. And for whatever reason, that seems to be just doing it for me lately. And to John Perkins' point, a good glass of Cabernet will get me every time.
any
Wonderful.
any particular recommended Cabernet?
To me, it's kind of with the beholder, right? It's
Sure.
whatever you like, but I'm a big fan of. I like big bold Cabernets. I'm a big Camus fan, but that's kind of hard on the pocketbook. So um, I think some of our favorites, more on the very economical category, are 337. I can't remember what the vineyard is there, but that is kind of a staple at our house as far as Cabernets go.
It gives us a new topic for the future. So we talked a lot about food week to week. We don't touch much on different drinks, etc. So here we have a new way to go. In terms of Cabernets, John, we have a small wine shop in the centre of the village here, and they do. I'm not sure who the vineyard is, but it's a called Juggernaut, which I actually have to say is a really nice full-bodied Cabernet. And another winery that I found recently, the labels are freak show, and there's Zinfandel and Cabernet and actually Pinot are all really nice as well. So all heartily recommended.
Oh, I like this challenge. I'm going to have to start drinking wine because I've been off the wine kick. This is great.
And don't get us started on whiskey.
Thank you for the recommendations.
Thank you, John. You're out of the hot seat. We really appreciate you coming and visiting with us.
Appreciate the invite.
Good way to wrap up the podcast. So, John, I think you had your son in last weekend. Maybe you can share a little bit. How did that all go?
It was great to have them come and visit. It just meant too many late nights and too much red wine consumed. So this coming weekend will be a much lighter weekend. So yeah, but because they were here for 5 days, I actually took the time off work as well, and actually not only took the time off work, but I really parked my phone so I wasn't checking emails on a constant basis and things like that. And it was just a really nice, relaxed family time. So
Yeah, that's great.
yeah, it was.
Even my wife and I this weekend, we spent a lot of time with our son, and we're still kind of relishing. When it's tragic that it's a pandemic and it's this COVID thing and all that, but even while we're out, we see so many more families engaging. There is sort of a silver lining around some of this. But it was for me. I spent 3 hours outside, and sorry about that. Let me recap that. Yeah, so this past weekend, it was pretty hot here. I was outside doing yard work for about 3 hours, and my wife was out there with me. And what we learned is that we are not good manual laborers anymore. I literally could not get rehydrated. This was Monday that I was out there. And then, of course, our weather went from 90 to next day 50. So it's been sort of up and down here with that. But that's been the biggest news for me, sort of a little bit boring. Don't have much else going on this weekend, to be honest with you.
So on the manual labour front, again, I tend to hope that someone else can come in and do it for me. But our backyard currently looks like a war zone, as that's been dug up to put in some pretty big flower beds ready for next year in terms of building a much more nature friendly back garden. So it's quite exciting actually to do it.
So we cleaned up about half of it, and I got a new deck done, and so there is a little bit of work this weekend. I will have to go out and kind of finalize. It's technically it's done, except there's some they called it flashing, but there's some pieces that were back ordered to kind of fill in around the trim and stuff. So that should be coming here soon. Otherwise, so excited to have a new deck. The big plans this weekend for me are to go out and get some furniture for my deck. 3 years in the house I'm in, and I don't have anything on the deck. I look almost homeless if you drove by, but that's an exciting thing. I'm happy to have. I haven't had my grill for about a month, and that's little things in life that I'm relishing. And then my son's got football's going on. He's got a scrimmage Friday tomorrow. That would be fun to. It's just a intra-squad scrimmage, but they have really opened up a little bit. They are going to play football. A couple towns locally here, cities that had said they weren't, are going to. For example, one is Shawnee. They have reverse course, and they're going to allow them to play football. That should be exciting. That added a couple games. There's a lot of restrictions on the games. And then, as the policy stands now, football players are unable to. So it's all online for the school system my son's in. But then in the last week of September, they're supposed to go. So right around the 28th, they're supposed to actually start having some in-classroom stuff. Well, the football players are unable to do that, and he will not be able to go to the classroom until football's over, plus 2 weeks.
Wow.
We'll see what the policy is there. Yeah, it's a little disappointing there. But for some reason, soccer players can go, volleyball players can go. It's weird that they just sort of isolated the football team, but it is what it is. He still wants to play, and so he'll have to do the classroom online, which launched this week and overall went pretty well. They said they had 50,000 people on the server, and it kind of worked. So that was encouraging. Anyhow, that'll do it for this week's episode. We were really happy to have John join us. For next week, we're going to continue along the theme of the impact COVID is having on drug development. We're going to drill a little bit deeper. We're going to focus on the impact it's had on the preclinical drug development space. And we're excited to talk a little bit more and share our thoughts around that. And again, thanks for joining us for a great episode. Any last thoughts, John Perkins?
Yeah, thank you very much. We've wrapped up 20. What's our next milestone from here? Look forward to getting there. Thank you very much.